They called her the ghost of the Zargos. They burned her world, took her tools, and left her with nothing but a mountain and a rifle. They thought she was broken, another casualty of a war that consumed everything. They learned she was forged, tempered in silences they could not comprehend, and sharpened by a logic they could not match. By dawn, they would understand that one perfect shot was all she ever needed, and all they would ever get. The air in forward operating base Needle was thin and sharp, a blade against the lungs. It tasted of diesel fumes, ozone from the humming server racks, and the ancient dust of the Zargos Mountains. That fob was an act of defiance, a steel and concrete scar gouged into the flank of a peak that had known only wind and eagles for millennia. It was a place of straight lines and hard angles thrust into a world of chaotic, geological violence. All around, the mountains rose like the teeth of a colossal predator, their granite faces scored by time and ice, their peaks perpetually wreathed in a cruel, indifferent wind that whispered of isolation. Silence here was not an absence of sound. It was a presence, a coiled thing that pressed in on the thin walls of the prefabricated structures, a constant reminder of the vast empty spaces that surrounded them. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the silence was of a different sort. It was a strained, artificial quiet, thick with the hum of electronics and the low murmur of ventilation systems. Green and amber lights blinked on a dozen screens, casting an unearthly glow on the drawn faces of the soldiers who watched them. They were watching for ghosts, for shadows that moved in the deep valleys where the satellites could not peer. The enemy was the Ashen Host, a name that suited them. They were phantoms, masters of the unforgiving terrain, and they had bled every unit sent into these mountains. Fob Needle was the latest attempt to pin them down, a high-tech anchor in a sea of rock, and it felt less like a fortress and more like bait on a hook. In a corner, away from the central command console and the nervous energy of the uniformed men, a woman sat before a specialized terminal. Her name was Alara, though few used it. To the soldiers, she was simply the geologist, or, less charitably, the rock sniffer. She was a civilian contractor, a line item in a budget, an anomaly in their rigid world of rank and file. Her appearance did nothing to challenge this perception. She wore simple gray fatigues, devoid of any insignia, and her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. There was a stillness about her that was often mistaken for timidity, a quiet economy of motion that made her seem to fade into the background. She was a ghost long before the battle began. Her screen displayed none of the tactical overlays or drone feeds that occupied the others. Instead, it showed a complex three-dimensional topographical map, rendered in shifting shades of ochre and gray. Lines of cobalt blue and crimson snaked through the model, representing seismic resonance patterns and subterranean stress fractures. Her fingers moved with quiet precision across the interface, tracing a network of deep, hidden structures within the limestone bedrock. She was not looking at the mountain, she was looking through it. The data flowed into her, not as numbers or images, but as a language. She could feel the mountain structure, the deep, karstic voids hollowed out by ancient water, the fragile shelves of rock waiting for the right vibration to collapse. The mountain spoke to her of its weaknesses, its secrets, and it spoke of the things that moved within it. She felt a change in the room's pressure before she heard the door hiss open. It was a subtle shift in the psychic atmosphere, a spike of abrasive energy that disrupted the fragile quiet. Major Kalen entered the talk as if breaching a door under fire. He was a man built of solid, blocky muscle, his uniform starched to a razor's edge, his jaw set in a permanent state of belligerent certainty. He moved with the heavy, grounded confidence of a man who believed his rank was a physical law, as immutable as gravity. His voice, when it came, was a blunt instrument meant to hammer the world into a shape he understood. "Status report," he barked, not as a question, but as a demand for the universe to align with his expectations. He strode to the central console, his boots striking the metal floor with an assertive clang that made the junior officers flinch. A lieutenant, Thorne, straightened up, his eyes fixed on the screen before him. "No change, sir. Perimeter sensors are cold. Drone surveillance shows no surface movement in the designated sectors. The ashen host remains quiet." Kalen made a noise of disgust, a low growl in his throat. Quiet is what they want us to think. They're down there, festering, planning. This passive observation is a waste of resources. We are here to hunt, not to watch. His gaze swept the room, a predator's glare designed to enforce discipline and root out any hint of dissent. It was a performance he had perfected over a career spent mistaking volume for authority. His eyes inevitably landed on Alara, and the contempt in them was palpable. He saw a civilian, an academic, a soft variable in his hard military equation. He saw a weakness. He marched over to her station, deliberately planting himself in her peripheral vision, a tactic to assert dominance. "And what are the rocks telling you today, Doctor?" The title was a sneer, a way of highlighting her otherness. "Have you found any magical crystals that will tell us where the boogeymen are hiding?" Alara did not look up from her screen. Her focus remained on a deep, unsettling anomaly she had just isolated, a harmonic resonance pattern that did not belong to the natural geology of the region. It was rhythmic, artificial. It was the hum of machinery deep underground. "The limestone is karstic," she said, her voice a low monotone, devoid of inflection. It was a statement of fact, offered without emotion or deference. Extensive subterranean voids and tunnel networks are not just possible. They are a geological certainty in this formation. The resonance signature in grid sector Gamma 7 is inconsistent with natural seismic activity. Kalen stared at the back of her head, his face darkening. Her refusal to engage with his tone, her clinical detachment, was a more profound defiance than any shouted argument. He had expected her to be flustered, to defend herself. Instead, she had offered him data, a language he did not speak and therefore did not respect. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "I have satellite thermal imaging, acoustic ground sensors, and a battalion of trained soldiers. What I don't have is time for your geological ghost stories. We move at 0400. We're going to punch right through Gamma 7 and collapse their whole rat's nest from the top down. Stick to your maps, contractor. The real work is for the men." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. The matter was closed. But as he walked away, Alara's eyes finally lifted from the screen, and for a fleeting moment they followed him. There was no anger in her gaze. There was only a cold, dispassionate certainty. She had seen the fracture lines in the rock, and she had just seen the fatal fracture in his command. Both pointed toward the same inevitable collapse. The briefing was held in a sterile, windowless room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. A large holographic map of the operational area dominated the center of the table, its glowing contours casting long shadows on the faces of the assembled squad leaders. Major Kalen stood before it, a pointer in his hand, moving it across the terrain with sharp, aggressive jabs. He was in his element, an audience, a map, and a plan born of pure, unadulterated confidence. He spoke of flanking maneuvers, suppressing fire, and overwhelming force. His words were the familiar, comforting liturgy of conventional warfare. "The Ashen Host believes these mountains will protect them," Kalen declared, his voice resonating with theatrical power. "They think they can hide in the shadows, bleed us with hit-and-run tactics. They are mistaken. At 0400, Task Force Hammer will advance directly into Grid Sector Gamma 7. Our intelligence, based on thermal and satellite reconnaissance, indicates their primary command node is located in this depression here." He tapped the pointer on a shallow basin in the holographic landscape. "We will use armor to breach their perimeter, followed by infantry to clear and secure. We will hit them with such force they won't have time to mount a coherent defense. We will decapitate their leadership and break their will to fight." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, scanning the faces of his men for the desired effect of hardened resolve. They nodded, their expressions grim. They were soldiers. They understood force. It was a language as simple and direct as a gunshot. But then, Kalen's eyes drifted to the back of the room where Alara stood, a silent observer as stipulated by her contract. He saw an opportunity to solidify his authority, to publicly exercise the doubt she represented. "Of course," he began, a smirk playing on his lips. "Our civilian analyst has a different theory." He gestured dismissively in her direction, forcing every eye in the room to turn to her. She stood perfectly still, her face unreadable. "She believes, based on her rock readings, that the enemy isn't on the surface at all. She thinks they're living like moles in a network of magical caves." The condescension was thick, designed to humiliate, to frame her expertise as fanciful nonsense. "Tell us, Doctor, should we be trading our rifles for pickaxes? Have you brought your dowsing rods to help us locate this mythical mole man kingdom?" A few of the younger officers chuckled nervously, glancing at their commander for permission. The room grew tense. This was a public challenge, a ritual of dominance. They all waited for her response, expecting either a timid retreat or a futile, emotional defense. Alara did neither. She took a single step forward, her gaze not on Kalen, but on the holographic map. Her voice, when it came, was as calm and level as a frozen lake. It cut through the strained atmosphere with surgical precision. "The term is not magical caves," she stated. "It is a karstic limestone formation. The ground in Gamma 7 is geologically unstable. The thermal signature you've identified as a command node is a geothermal vent, a natural feature. Your armored column will be advancing over a thin crust of rock, honeycombed with voids. The weight of your vehicles is likely to trigger a catastrophic collapse." She paused, letting the clinical assessment settle. Then she added the final, chilling detail. "The anomalous resonance patterns I detected are not centered on your target. They are concentrated here and here." 2 faint red pulses appeared on the map, far from the intended target, on the high ridges overlooking the FOB itself. "They are consistent with the vibration of heavy machinery being moved into firing positions. They are not hiding from you, Major. They are luring you into a kill box while they prepare to eliminate this base." Silence. Her words, stripped of all emotion, were more damning than any accusation. She had not attacked Kalen's character, only his facts. She had dismantled his entire plan with a few quiet sentences. The smirk vanished from Kalen's face, replaced by a flush of raw fury. He had expected to swat a fly and had instead been stung by a scorpion. His authority had been questioned not with insolence, but with logic, and in front of his men. It was an unforgivable transgression. He slammed his pointer down on the table. The sharp crack made everyone jump. "That is enough," he roared, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "Your contract is for geological survey, not tactical speculation. You are a civilian. You will not undermine my command or the morale of this unit with your paranoid fantasies. Is that clear?" Alara met his furious gaze. Her expression was utterly neutral. "Yes," she said. It was not an apology. It was not a concession. It was a simple, one-word acknowledgement of his outburst. The word hung in the air, a final, quiet testament to her composure. "Get out," Kalen hissed, his finger trembling as he pointed to the door. "Return to your quarters. You are not to enter the talk or speak to any member of this unit until this operation is concluded." Alara turned without a word and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her with a soft pneumatic sigh, leaving Kalen alone with his rage and a room full of soldiers who had just witnessed his carefully constructed certainty crack. He had won the confrontation, asserted his rank, and silenced the dissenting voice. But as the mission clock on the wall ticked silently toward 0400, a new, unwelcome element had been introduced into his perfect equation: the cold, heavy weight of doubt. And in the thin air of the Zagros Mountains, doubt was a poison that could kill you faster than any bullet. The night was moonless, a profound and smothering darkness that devoured light and sound. At precisely 0400, the rumbling of engines broke the silence as the armored column of Task Force Hammer rolled out from a fob needle. Their headlights cut feeble yellow gashes in the oppressive black, illuminating swirling dust and the impassive faces of the surrounding rock. In the talk, the mood was thick with a tension that was almost physical. Kalen stood over the central console, his arms crossed, watching the green icons representing his vehicles crawl across the tactical map toward Gamma 7. He was a statue of forced confidence. Alara was not in her quarters. She was in a small, forgotten maintenance closet that housed the base's primary seismic sensors. The room was little more than a cage of humming electronics and thick data cables. She had bypassed the lock on her terminal in her room, routing the raw, unfiltered data feed from the mountain's core directly to a small, hardened data slate she carried. She watched not a tactical map, but a seismograph. She was not watching soldiers. She was listening to the mountain's heartbeat. The first tremor was subtle, a flicker on her screen that would have been dismissed by anyone else as background noise. But to Alara, it was a scream. It was the sound of millions of tons of rock groaning under a weight it could not bear. On the main screen in the talk, the lead vehicle's icon blinked once, then turned red. Then it vanished. "Viper 1 is off the board," an analyst shouted. "We've lost their signal." Before Kalen could respond, two more icons, a main battle tank and another armored personnel carrier, winked out of existence. A panicked voice crackled over the comms, distorted by static. "The ground! It's gone! It's just gone! We're sinking! God, we're—" The transmission ended in a shriek of tearing metal and a sudden, final silence. The ground in Gamma 7 had collapsed, exactly as she had predicted, but that was only the beginning. The moment the trap was sprung, the real attack began. A series of concussive blasts ripped through the fob's perimeter. The lights in the TOS flickered violently and died, plunging the room into emergency red lighting. Alarms blared, a chaotic symphony of failure. IEDs at the northern wall! They're inside the wire! Comms are down! We're being jammed on all frequencies. The supply depot is on fire. Repeat, the main ammo and fuel dump is hit. Outside, the night erupted into a hellscape of tracer fire and explosions. The ashen host did not emerge from the valleys. They rose from the ground itself. Hidden tunnel entrances, masked by clever camouflage, opened up all around the base. Figures swarmed out, moving with a terrifying speed and purpose. They were not aiming for the TOS or the barracks. They were systematically eliminating the base's ability to fight back. The communications array, the heavy weapon emplacements, the supplies. It was a methodical, brutally efficient dissection. Kalen was frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The reality of the situation was so far removed from his plan that his mind could not process it. This was not a battle, it was an execution. His neat, orderly world of tactics and projections had been shattered. He was adrift in a sea of chaos, and he was drowning. He finally found his voice, but it was strained, ragged with panic. Form a defensive perimeter around the TOC. All units fall back and consolidate. Lay down suppressing fire. I want a wall of lead on all sides. His orders were textbook. They were the standard conditioned response to being overrun, and they were utterly wrong. Thorne, the young lieutenant, tried to reason with him. Sir, they aren't trying to take the TOC. They're corralling us. If we pull everyone back, we give up what little ground we have. Do it, Lieutenant, Kalen screamed, his face spattered with sweat in the red gloom. That's an order. Call for air support. We can't, sir. The jammers are too strong. We're cut off, Thorne replied, his voice tight with the strain of maintaining military discipline in the face of abject failure. Kalen's orthodoxy was failing him. His reliance on protocol was a liability. He was trying to fight a conventional battle against an unconventional enemy, an enemy who understood the terrain, both above and below ground, better than he ever could. He was shouting orders into a void, each command making the situation worse, tightening the noose around the necks of his soldiers. The fire from the supply depot raged, a funeral pyre for his authority, casting dancing, demonic shadows against the mountains. The base was dying, and its commander was helping the enemy kill it. In the humming silence of the seismic sensor closet, Ilara watched the chaos unfold as pure data. The explosions registered as sharp spikes on her seismograph. The rhythmic chatter of heavy machine guns was a frantic, vibrating hum. She cross-referenced the timing and location of the blasts with the known structural weaknesses in the rock beneath the base. A horrifyingly elegant pattern emerged. The enemy's attack was not random. It was surgical. They were using precise explosive charges to destabilize the very ground the FOB was built on, creating choke points and new lines of fire. They weren't just fighting soldiers. They were weaponizing her mountain. Amidst the cacophony of battle, she isolated a new sound. It was the one she had been waiting for, the one she had warned Kalen about. It was a low-frequency, cyclical hum emanating from the high ridge to the east, a peak known locally as the Widow's Peak. It was the sound of a high-energy capacitor bank charging. The main attack was a diversion. The real threat was powering up, preparing to deliver the killing blow. She looked at the chronometer on her slate. Sunrise was less than an hour away. The ashen host would use the first light of dawn to acquire their target, to glass the entire base from a position no one could reach, and no one was even watching. They would all be burned from the earth. And she was the only one who knew it was coming. The Tactical Operations Center was a microcosm of hell. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt electronics and fear. Red emergency lights painted everything in blood hues, turning the frantic movements of the soldiers into a grotesque pantomime of desperation. Kalen stood in the center of it all, a man hollowed out by his own failure. He shouted orders that were either impossible to execute or tactically suicidal, his voice a raw nerve of panic. The disciplined structure of his command had disintegrated into a frantic, leaderless mob. Into this chaos, Alara walked. She emerged from the shadows of a corridor, moving with the same unnerving calm she always possessed. She held the data slate in one hand, its screen glowing with the complex waveforms of the mountain's dying breaths. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her very presence, an island of absolute stillness in the storm, was enough to draw the eyes of every man in the room. Even Kalen fell silent, turning to stare at the woman he had dismissed and exiled. "Major," she said, her voice cutting through the din with the clarity of a scalpel. "Your perimeter is irrelevant. They are not trying to breach it. They are pinning you in place." She held up the slate, showing the rhythmic, pulsing waveform she had isolated. "This is a capacitor bank charging. The signature originates from the highest point of Widow's Peak. Cross-referencing the energy output with atmospheric ionization levels, I assess they are deploying a long-range directed energy weapon. At sunrise, when they have clear line of sight, they will incinerate this base. The ground assault is a fixing action, a distraction to keep you from seeing the real threat until it is too late." Her analysis was delivered with the dispassionate precision of a machine. It was cold, logical, and utterly terrifying. For a moment, no one spoke. The truth of her words settled over the room like a shroud, but Kalen, his ego shattered, could not accept it. To accept her analysis was to accept the totality of his own failure. "Nonsense!" he bellowed, grabbing onto the last vestiges of his authority. "That's insane! A conspiracy theory! You're a geologist! Stick to your rocks, contractor! I am in command here, and I say we hold this position." It was in that moment that the final break occurred. Lieutenant Thorne had been watching Kalen, his face a mixture of insubordination and dawning horror. He had followed the major's orders, and he had seen them lead his men to their deaths. Now, he looked from his raving commander to the calm, certain face of the civilian contractor. He saw the catastrophic failure of tradition and the undeniable power of pure competence. He made a choice. He turned his back on Kalen and faced Alara. The act was a quiet mutiny, more powerful than any weapon discharge. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and clear, cutting Kalen off mid-rant. "What do you need?" The word "ma'am" was a thunderclap in the silent war for control. It was a transfer of allegiance, a recognition of the true authority in the room. One by one, the other operators and analysts turned away from the major. They turned to her, their expressions desperate, but filled with a new, fragile hope. Authority did not need to be seized. It had simply flowed to the only person who deserved it. Kalen was left standing alone, sputtering, his rank now nothing more than a meaningless word. He had become a ghost in his own command center. Ilara's gaze met Thorne's. There was no triumph in her eyes, only focus. Divert all remaining auxiliary power to the primary atmospheric sensors. I need a real-time, high-fidelity reading of barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity for all altitudes between this position and the summit of Widow's Peak. Thorne nodded, already moving to a terminal. Done. I need access to the armory, she continued. Specifically, 1 M200 intervention, 408 Cheyenne Tactical, and all available custom-load ammunition with polymer tip, solid core penetrators. A weapons sergeant looked at her, stunned. That's a specialized sniper system, an extreme long-range rifle. The shot you're talking about, it's over 3 kilometers, uphill. In these winds, it's not possible. Alara's eyes were cold as chips of flint. It is if you can see the wind, she said cryptically. Get me the rifle. The sergeant hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and sprinted from the room. Finally, Alara said, her eyes fixed on the holographic map, which now displayed the swirling wind patterns and pressure zones between the FAB and the peak. I need you to keep them busy. Create a diversion, something loud and convincing on the western perimeter. Draw their attention away from the east face of the mountain. Thorne looked at their dwindling resources, the burning depot, the relentless enemy fire. With what? He asked, the single crack in his newfound resolve. Alara pointed to Kalen's abandoned command console. Major Kalen's plan was to use armor to punch through their lines. The last operational tank, the Reckoning, is still in its bay. Use it. Send it west. It will be a suicide run. But it will be loud. And it will buy me the time I need. The order was brutal in its pragmatism, sacrificing their last piece of heavy armor and its crew for a diversion. But it was a choice. A plan where before there had been only chaos. Thorne looked at the grim-faced tank crew standing nearby. They had heard the order. They looked at each other, and then they nodded. They would rather die on their feet executing a meaningful plan than be slaughtered in a hole following a failed one. As the sergeant returned with the heavy rifle case, Alara was already gone, slipping back into the shadows from which she came. She left behind a command center that had been reborn. It was no longer a place of panic. It was a place of purpose, its new heart, a quiet woman with a data slate and an impossible plan. Alara moved through the darkness like a phantom. She did not use the established paths or perimeter tracks. Those were watched, mined, and bracketed by enemy fire. Instead, she moved with the mountain, her path dictated by the geological survey maps stored in her photographic memory. She followed a deep, ancient fault line, a crack in the world that offered a covered and concealed route up the eastern flank. To anyone else, it was an impassable jumble of scree and sheer rock faces. To her, it was a staircase. The rifle was heavy on her back, its cold metal a dense, reassuring weight. The data slate was strapped to her forearm, its screen displaying a constant stream of atmospheric data, a swirling, chaotic dance of numbers that only she could read. She climbed not just with her body, but with her mind. Every handhold was chosen based on her knowledge of the rock's tensile strength. Every footstep was placed to avoid loose shale she knew would be present in that stratum. The wind howled around her, a physical force that tried to tear her from the mountain's face. But she did not fight it. She understood it. She saw it as Thorne's sensors painted it for her. A river of air, with currents, eddies, and undertows, all shaped and guided by the mountain's unique topography. She could see the wind. The climb was a brutal, vertical marathon. Her lungs burned in the thin, cold air. Her muscles screamed in protest. But her mind was a sanctuary of pure, cold calculation. She was no longer just a geophysicist. The layers of her cover identity were being stripped away by the ascent, revealing the harder, more lethal core beneath. The skills were dormant, not gone. The muscle memory of the rifle's weight, the instinctive feel for a stable firing position, the preternatural calm in the face of impossible odds, it all came back to her, as natural as breathing. Far below, a new sound ripped through the night, the deep guttural roar of a turbine engine, followed by the heavy clank of treads. The tank, reckoning, charged out of the western gate, its main gun blazing. It was a magnificent, desperate act of defiance. The ashen host, surprised by the sudden, aggressive sally, turned the bulk of their firepower to meet it. Rockets streaked through the dark, and the night was filled with the thunder of the tank's cannon. The diversion had begun. It had bought her time. As she neared the summit of Widow's Peak, she slowed, her movements becoming infinitesimal. She crawled the last 50 meters on her belly, using the jagged rocks as cover. Peering over a ledge, she saw them. A team of 6 enemy specialists, working with calm efficiency around a complex and sinister-looking piece of machinery. It was mounted on a heavy tripod, its surface a matte black that absorbed the faint starlight. A series of thick cables snaked from it to a humming power unit. At its heart was a large, crystalline lens, which even now was beginning to glow with a faint internal blue light. They were confident. They were on a secure, inaccessible peak, their comrades keeping the base occupied. They felt untouchable. Alara slid back from the ledge and unslung the rifle. Her movements were fluid, economical, and practiced. She assembled the weapon, the clicks of the locking mechanisms barely audible over the wind. She chambered a single, custom-loaded round. She had only been given 5, but she only needed 1. She attached the data slate to the rifle's integrated ballistics computer. The screen came alive, showing her the shot. Not just the line of sight, but the complex, invisible path the bullet would have to travel. Distance, 3,217 meters. Elevation gain, 844 meters. Wind, gusting from 270 degrees at the firing point, but shifting to 315 degrees in the valley, then creating a powerful updraft along the peak's eastern face. Temperature gradient, air density, barometric pressure, Coriolis effect, spin drift, 1,000 variables, each one capable of turning a perfect shot into a miss by meters. A standard ballistics computer would fail. It could not account for the micro-eddies and chaotic thermal currents created by the mountain itself. But Alara's computer was not standard. It was running her proprietary algorithm, one that integrated real-time atmospheric data with a predictive geological model. She was factoring in how the morning sun, still below the horizon, was beginning to warm the eastern rock face, creating a thermal lift that would bend the bullet's trajectory. She was calculating how the wind, channeled through a specific ravine a kilometer away, a ravine she had mapped from seismic data, would create a pocket of low pressure just before the target. She settled behind the rifle, the cold stock pressed against her cheek. She was no longer a woman on a mountain. She was the nexus point of 1,000 data streams, the calm center of a hurricane of physics. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat becoming a slow, steady drum. Through the powerful scope, she saw the enemy leader give a hand signal. The blue glow from the weapon's lens intensified. They were in the final charging sequence. The diversion below was dying. The roar of the tank's engine had fallen silent, replaced by the triumphant shouts of the enemy. A column of black smoke rose into the pre-dawn sky. The crew of the Reckoning had bought her the window she needed. She would not waste it. She let out half a breath and held it. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, the crosshairs and the glowing blue crystal. She did not aim at the crystal. Her calculations showed her where the bullet needed to go to arrive at the crystal. She aimed at a point in the empty air, high and to the left of the target. It was an act of pure, analytical faith. Now! Her finger squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a savage but controlled explosion. The sound was instantly snatched away by the wind. The bullet was on its way, a tiny speck of engineered perfection on a journey through chaos. She did not need to watch its impact. She already knew the result. The math was perfect. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then, on the distant peak, the weapon did not simply break. It detonated. The focusing crystal struck with precision at the peak of its energy cycle, overloaded catastrophically. A silent, blinding flash of blue-white light erupted, vaporizing the machine and the team around it in an instant. The shockwave, when it finally reached her, was little more than a whisper, a faint puff of air against her cheek. The eerie hum that had permeated the battlefield was gone. On the slopes below, the furious chatter of the Ashen Host's assault faltered. Their triumphant cries died in their throats as they stared up at the peak where their ultimate weapon had just vanished. Their morale, built on the promise of an inevitable, fiery victory, shattered. The attack broke. The phantom warriors, who had seemed unstoppable moments before, began to melt back into the shadows, their coordinated assault collapsing into a disorganized retreat. A profound, unnatural silence descended upon the Zagros Mountains, broken only by the crackling of the burning supply depot. In the talk, the soldiers stared at the thermal imaging screen. The massive energy signature on Widow's Peak had simply ceased to exist. They didn't understand how. They only knew that the screaming abyss they had been staring into had vanished. They were alive. They had been saved. The sun crested the horizon, its golden light spilling over the ravaged landscape, illuminating the smoke and the silence. Just after the first rays of dawn touched the battered comms tower of Fob Needle, a single, high-altitude channel, hardened against jamming, punched through the electronic warfare haze. It was a tight beam, encrypted signal, originating from a stratospheric command platform. It was not a general rescue call. It was a sniper's bullet of communication, aimed at a single target. Inside the TOC, Thorne was trying to restore order, assessing damage and coordinating aid for the wounded. The voice that crackled from the speaker was calm, ancient, and carried the weight of absolute authority. FOB Needle, this is General Madsen. I need to speak with callsign Echo, immediately. Thorne froze. He had never heard that callsign. It wasn't on any roster. He keyed the mic, his voice hesitant. General, this is Lieutenant Thorne, acting commander. I'm not familiar with that call sign. Please clarify. The response was laced with an Arctic impatience. Don't play games with me, Lieutenant. My sources indicate a catastrophic command failure and a subsequent unsanctioned countermeasure originating from your location. Find me Echo, now. Just then, Kalen, his face ashen, his uniform stained with grime, stumbled back into the TOC. He had been wandering the perimeter in a daze, witnessing the ruin of his command. Hearing the general's voice, a flicker of his old arrogance returned. He saw a chance to reclaim his narrative, to salvage his career. He shoved Thorne aside and grabbed the handset. "General Madsen, this is Major Kalen," he said, his voice attempting a confidence it could not sustain. "We have repelled a major enemy assault. The situation is under control. There were complications, but the threat has been neutralized." Madsen's voice dropped several degrees, becoming a razor of pure ice. "I am not speaking to you, Major. I am aware of the complications. I am also aware that your entire command is alive because of an asset you tried to sideline. Now, for the last time, put her on." As if summoned by the words, Elara appeared in the doorway of the talk. She was covered in dust and rock grime, her face smudged with carbon from the rifle's discharge. She moved to the console, took the handset from Kalen's numb fingers, and spoke into it. Her voice was the same low, factual monotone it had always been. "Echo here," she said. The tension in Madsen's voice vanished, replaced by a weary professionalism. "Report, Echo." Ashen Host deployed a directed energy weapon on Widow's Peak, using the main ground assault as a fixing action, Elara stated, her words precise and stripped of any extraneous detail. Local command failed to heed intelligence, leading to significant losses and the near-total compromise of the facility. I enacted Protocol Silver Spear. I neutralized the primary threat at 05:17 hours. The asset is secure. Kalen stared at her, his mind struggling to connect the woman he knew as a quiet geologist with the cold, professional operative speaking to one of the most powerful men in the military. Protocol Silver Spear. He had only ever read about it in the highest level security briefings. It was a deep state failsafe, an authorization for a single, embedded operative to assume ultimate tactical authority in the event of a complete command collapse to protect a strategic asset at any cost. "The asset?" Madsen asked. "You mean the base?" "Negative, General," Elara replied. "The base was the cover story. The asset is the mountain itself. My geological survey was not a survey. It was a deep core analysis. The Zargos Range contains the largest untapped deposit of polysilicate crystalline structures on the continent. The material is essential for next-generation shielding and energy weapon manufacturing. The Ashen Host was not trying to destroy the base. They were trying to deny us access to the resource. My primary mission was to ensure that did not happen." The revelation fell like a physical blow. They weren't soldiers guarding a border. They were unwitting security guards for a geological treasure trove. Kalen's entire operation, his ambitions, his losses, it had all been a sideshow to a war of resources he didn't even know he was fighting. Elara was not a contractor. She was the guardian. Madsen's voice came back, heavy with finality. "I see. Well done, Echo. Major Kalen." The major flinched as his name was spoken. "You are hereby relieved of command. You are confined to your quarters pending a full Article 32 investigation into dereliction of duty and willful endangerment of a strategic national asset. Lieutenant Thorne, you are in command until relief arrives. You will follow Echo's directives to the letter. Is that understood?" "Yes, General," Thorne breathed, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe as he looked at Elara. Kalen opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but no words came out. He looked at Elara, at the woman he had mocked and dismissed. He saw no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. She was simply an instrument of a purpose far greater than his own understanding. His career had not been ended by a rival or an enemy. It had been dismantled by a quiet, unassailable fact, and he had been too arrogant to see it. He turned and walked out of the talk, a broken man, his authority not just stripped, but revealed to have been an illusion all along. A new order settled over Fob Needle in the wake of the battle. It was a quiet, somber order, born of shared trauma and a profound recalibration of their world. The frantic energy was gone, replaced by a methodical sense of purpose. The soldiers moved with a new gravity, their gazes often drifting toward the silent woman who now sat, once again, in her corner of the talk. They gave her a wide berth, treating her not with the casual dismissal of before, but with a deep, almost fearful reverence. She was no longer the rock sniffer. She was Echo, the ghost, the woman who had climbed a mountain in the dark and killed a monster with a single, impossible shot. She showed no awareness of her new status. There was no victory lap, no acceptance of congratulations. She simply returned to her work, analyzing the post-engagement seismic data, mapping the structural damage the Ashen Host's explosives had done to the mountain's foundations. Her focus was absolute, her dedication to the mission untainted by the drama of human conflict she had just resolved. She had saved them all, but she was not one of them. She was something other, a custodian of secrets they could barely comprehend. Thorn, now the de facto commander, found himself running every major decision past her. He would approach her station hesitantly, presenting his plans for reorganizing the defenses or distributing the last of the rations. She would listen without looking up from her screen, process the information, and offer a quiet, logical suggestion. Move the southern watchpost 3 meters to the east. The bedrock is more stable there. Or, the water from the secondary well is likely contaminated with shale dust from the explosions. Triple filtration will be necessary. Her advice was always practical, always correct. She was leading them, not with commands, but with irrefutable data. Late that afternoon, Thorn approached her station. He held 2 steaming mugs in his hands. The smell was rich and dark, real coffee, a luxury they thought had been burned away in the supply depot fire. He placed one mug on the desk beside her terminal, next to a rock sample she had been studying. "I found a personal stash in the Major's quarters," Thorn said quietly, by way of explanation. "Figured he wouldn't be needing it. I rerouted the last of the power from the auxiliary generator to the percolator." He paused. "Figured you earned it." It was not praise. It was not a thank you. It was a simple offering, a gesture of profound, unspoken respect. It was an acknowledgement of a shared burden, a recognition of her humanity beneath the layers of competence and classification. For the first time, Ilara's fingers stilled on her console. She did not look up, but her entire posture shifted for a fraction of a second. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was all the acknowledgement he needed. He nodded back and walked away, leaving her to her work and her coffee. The quietest of transactions, it was the only moment of genuine connection she had allowed, a tiny fissure in her armor of professional detachment. By the time the heavy-lift helicopters of the relief force descended 2 days later, bringing with them a new commander and a host of investigators, Ilara was gone. She had vanished as quietly and completely as she had arrived. There was no record of her departure, no farewells. It was as if she had simply dissolved back into the mountain she understood so well. The only things she left behind were the geological and atmospheric data, a complete tactical solution for securing the region, and the rifle. It was found back in its case in the armory, cleaned with meticulous care. Beside it, placed with the precision of a jeweler, was a single, perfectly formed brass casing. The only evidence of the shot that had saved them all. The official report was a masterpiece of obfuscation, a thick document filled with redacted paragraphs and sanitized accounts that spoke of a lucky artillery strike and a disorganized enemy. Major Kalin was quietly discharged for medical reasons. But the soldiers who had survived that night at a fob needle knew the truth. They would tell a different story, a legend passed in hushed tones, in lonely outposts for years to come. They spoke of the quiet woman who listened to the mountain, who was underestimated, disarmed, and left with nothing. They spoke of how she met the enemy at dawn, and with a single, perfect shot, reminded them all that the most dangerous weapon in any war is a mind that sees what others cannot. They called her the ghost of the Zagros, and her true legacy was not written in any report, but in the profound, respectful silence she left in her wake.